This video is going to be a preview of the Lions-Vikings matchup this afternoon in Week 7. I think it's a huge early season collision between two teams that are vying for supremacy in the NFC North. Minnesota's obviously 5-0 with the fourth lowest points per game allowed at 15.2 points allowed per game. They also got wins over Brock Purdy and the 49ers, a blowout win over C.J. Stroud and the Texans, a win against the Packers where they forced 4 turnovers, and then also beat Aaron Rodgers 2 weeks ago over in England. I'm not able to produce a two-way preview, to be honest with you. That's why this one is so late, number one. And while I think Sam Darnold's story is really cool, it's a great story so far. I think he's got 11 touchdowns against 4 interceptions. Kind of a surprise starter, I guess, for many people around the NFL. The Vikings really couldn't have scripted the start to their season any better. They're leading the NFL's best division so far. They have produced 11 interceptions, defensively, which is pretty unbelievable through 5 games. The Lions, meanwhile, at 4-1, would not really probably have accepted this situation individually if they were offered a 4-1 start before Week 1 that also included losing Aiden Hutchinson last week after already losing defensive starters in Marcus Davenport, Derek Barnes, and then prior to that, guys like John Kaminsky, who played a role as well. I'm going to focus this preview, like I said, I can't get a two-way preview done, or I was unable to, so I'm going to focus this on Detroit's offense versus Minnesota's highly ranked defense, as well it should be. The coordinator matchup of Ben Johnson and Brian Flores that we got to see twice last year. The Vikings have produced at least 2 turnovers in every game so far. Is that sustainable? I'm not sure, but that's going to be that's going to be my main point overall in this video, is turnovers and the run game. We'll kind of get to an explanation of that after I show a little bit of film here in a moment in terms of what can happen to your offense if you don't produce some type of run game against the Vikings defense. You allow them to basically have a whole bunch of 3rd and 7 and 3rd and 8s where it's a known passing down. The Vikings have forced 13 turnovers this year. Like I said, I think 11 interceptions. Now, they've also committed 9 turnovers themselves, which is significant, and I'll come back to that point later about their offensive turnovers since they've had their current head coach in place. The Vikings are second in the NFL at stopping the run right now, allowing 67 yards per game. The Ravens are first. Detroit is actually third, by the way, after being second in that category last year. The Lions stopped the run. The Vikings are now too. They've only allowed one 100-yard rushing game in 2024. That was 102 yards to the 49ers in their 23-17 win in Week 2. To me, that's what this game is about. From a simplistic standpoint, turnovers and the run game. I think it's simple, maybe overly simple, kind of classic. There's a lot of other factors, don't get me wrong. We'll talk about them a little bit before I get to some film. The Lions receivers, St. Brown, Jamison Williams, and then Laporta and Gibbs as a receiving threat versus the Vikings coverage structure that has, like I said, produced so many interceptions and turnovers. Goff versus a Brian Flores defense. The pre-2023 dynamic absolutely shifted in the 2 regular season wins last year by the Lions. Also, the run game for the Lions has produced, they've produced at least 139 yards on the ground in 4 of their 5 games. In fact, the dichotomy there that you have, or collision, I guess I should say, of one team, Detroit's offense, averaging 157 yards per game, rushing, 4th in the NFL, against, and meanwhile, Minnesota's offense only rushes for 115 per game, way down 21st. So that matchup on the other side, I think, is probably going to swing heavily in Detroit's favor, producing more often than not a lot of 3rd and 6s, 3rd and 7s for Detroit's defense. This is a huge collision since Flores' defense has been shutting down the run game. Look, they held the Texans to 38 yards, the Packers to 86, the Jets only 36 2 weeks ago in Week 5. Detroit hasn't put up less than 116 yards. This is going to be a big point of contention, or a big momentum swing potentially. Can Detroit run the football? Can they get above, Lions fans are not going to like to hear this, can they get above 125? If they can get above 125, and the second part of my equation is probably obvious by now, either don't turn the football over at all or be +1 turnover margin. Without Kevin Zeitler, is going to be a probability of him playing seems to be low at this point as I record this video. It'll come out Sunday morning. Look, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, if they can get going, the Lions can flip the dynamic on this Vikings defense. That it's worked for Minnesota so far perfectly, which is stop the run on first down, and in some cases absolutely shut it down, force a 2nd and 8, and then a 3rd and 6. Utilize all the different coverage variations that Brian Flores' guys can execute, confuse the quarterback or slow down the processing post-snap, let the pass rush get there. You get the idea. I'm familiar with that dynamic. That's basically what the Baltimore Ravens did in 2023 in their nearly historic season. There's a lot of guys that have contributed to this defense. And in fact, there's times where I feel like Flores is playing like substitution defense. Not all the time, don't get me wrong, but there's times where guys are moving in and out, being substituted in. There's a lot of depth there. Perhaps some depth is potentially missing. I think their best inside linebacker is Cashman. I will talk about their sticks blitz zero usage. Don't get me wrong, there'll be times where he'll play man. I'm going to illustrate 2 coverages that are drastically different and how I think Flores, and I think it's pretty obvious that everyone would accept this, he's hiding the coverage to the quarterback pre-snap and then having it changed post-snap such that the quarterback's processing doesn't allow him to make quick decisions. You almost get paralysis by analysis. So check out this play. It's a 2nd and 12 against the Packers. This is a Tampa 2. If you were to subtract, I think this is Van Ginkel right here. Take him out of the equation. You have a corner in the flats, a half-field safety, and then this is 22, their other safety, who's running the middle of the field, essentially turning that Tampa 2 into what it is, which is a 3-deep coverage. But they've added an 8th dropper underneath, again, which is really cool. I've seen this before, but very rarely. So basically, you're playing a typical Tampa 2, where the Mike linebacker, or in this case, it's a safety, who's running to the middle of the field, deep, with his back turned at times to match a vertical. Now, no vertical shows here, but you can imagine that, and this happens at times. Sometimes you get like a little dig or a crossing route underneath. As this player, typically a Mike linebacker, like I said, gets depth, you get an opening in the middle of the field. So what they've done here on this 2nd and 12 is drop an 8th defender, or basically a second middle of the field defender, lower, who can react to underneath routes number 1, but who can also be in the window for any routes in between the hashes. Pretty cool little variation that I'll show you a little bit later. More typical version of Tampa 2, and this is sometimes what it takes to get the job done, is ridiculous. I guess you could call it anticipation, but also trust in your receivers. In this case, it's a 3rd and 3. Aaron Rodgers over the middle to, I think it's Conklin, the tight end. Rodgers threw like 3 balls in this game like this, whereby he trusted his receivers or tight ends to go get it, and unfortunately for him, only one instance was anyone able to go up and get the football. Now, I do think you got a inside linebacker kind of hedging a little bit too far to the middle of the field. 7 is going to turn and play in between the hashes, basically called running the pipe between the hash and the middle of the field. So you can see the coverage breaking down there with 2 corners in the flats, 2 safeties, and then 7 again. I think he should be getting a little bit more depth. Rodgers maybe anticipated it, saw it, whatever you want to call it. Ends up being a 25-yard gain over the middle. They play the Tampa 2 very well, in my opinion. Number 1. Number 2, they play it from a lot of different looks. This is a 3rd and 7 against the Packers. Not necessarily a similar pass, but this is kind of illustrative of the type of ball skills that the Vikings defenders are showing thus far this year. I don't expect it to continue. I mean, if you were to extrapolate 11 interceptions over 5 games, you're looking at, in the modern era, the most interceptions since pre-2001. I think the Packers in 2011 had 33. Packers in 2009 had like 31. And I think the Browns in 2000 or 2001 had 33 or 34. You wouldn't anticipate that number staying, or that projection staying. This is a little bit more typical version of a Tampa 2. 2 corners, half-field safeties, here and here. 54 linebacker, I think it's Grugier Hill. He's going to make a great play on the ball. Little underneath route that Jordan Love is trying to stick in there to Christian Watson. And these guys are committed to breaking on the ball. Whatever they've done in practice to catch the football from a defensive standpoint, Everyone should try to replicate it if it is going to continue at this rate, because everyone who gets their hands near the football seems to catch it. Beautiful catch, but a typical illustration of a Tampa 2. For a moment, let's get away from that. We'll come back to it in a little bit. Sticks Blitz 0. You may not be too familiar with it as a Lions fan. I certainly am as a Ravens fan because we first saw it against the Dolphins. I think Flores was a part of that staff in 2021, excuse me. So basically lining up more guys on the line of scrimmage than the offensive line can block. And then at times they're reading it, but at times he has guys just dropping out to a predetermined side. Occasionally I've suspected they were looking at the quarterback and dropping out if the quarterback looked to your side. Most iterations of it, at least the more sound iterations, to digress here for a moment, you would be reading the offensive lineman to your inside. So if that offensive lineman was to step to you, then you would peel back and drop out because of how many guys are lined up here. If you can get one of these linemen to step to you and then you drop out, get into the window of a potential underneath drag or anything like that, you've created a domino effect that allows other players away from you to get to the quarterback free. Not necessarily what I think is happening in 2024. If you were to do it with these two guys here, let's just say both reading the center, and we'll let it run just for a moment, see what happens. If you were to do it this way, and as I'm describing it, then 52, I think it's Jihad Ward actually, guy who used to play for the Ravens, he would drop out because someone stepped to him. But look, I don't know on a particular play who's reading it and who's not. That's part of the brilliant, design of it, if you ask me, is such that multiple different versions of it can be used in a particular game or even on a series or possession. And Flores has control over who reads it and who doesn't. It could be predetermined at times. It doesn't necessarily work out here, but you get the idea as a Lions fan. If you don't generate some type of run game, this happens to be a 3rd and 14. Hopefully you're not in a whole bunch of those. And you're in a lot of 3rd and 8s or 3rd and 7s. You may see this coverage. I call it Sticks Blitz 0, whereby these guys, oftentimes the way that Flores used to teach it, were just staring at the quarterback. And as soon as the quarterback turned, let's say, to look to this side, these guys were flat foot, no back pedal, no technique, really jumping routes. The opportunity to throw the ball deep, I always thought was there, but most teams don't take advantage of it. In this case, it's a chip release to George Kittle for 11 yards on a 3rd and 14. They actually converted on the very next play of 4th down. It's inconsequential to the point that we're trying to make here. A Sticks version, a Sticks to Tampa 2 version here that I wanted to try to tie this point up that illustrates how versatile and different the defense can be at times. So we'll end up talking about this side of the field compared to the top side. Looks like Sticks potentially with all those guys on the line of scrimmage. Call it mug, whatever you want to call it. And then down here, I think this is Gilmore, the veteran corner that signed with them. I think really could help them a lot because he's a brilliant man corner. Is essentially, if you ask me, dropping to half-field safety. This guy's playing half-field safety. Now, Gilmore's got more width than that safety up there, don't get me wrong. So I understand if you don't like the way that I'm explaining it. This safety is sitting in the flats. I think it's Smith. Again, it's a 3rd and 5. I think if you were to just take a picture here, independent of who these two players are from a positional standpoint, you would say this is a half-field safety, this is a corner sitting in the flats, this is a corner sitting in the flats, this is a half-field safety, and a Mike linebacker running in between the hashes. It's actually not a Mike linebacker from a positional standpoint. And again, that goes to my point, or the one I'm trying to make here, is that Flores can mix and match who goes to each position on the field post-snap, almost no matter where they lined up. Again, very reminiscent of a lot of the things the Ravens did on defense last year under Mike Macdonald. Another coverage you may see, particularly on 3rd downs, this one happens to be a 2nd and 8, ends up in a sack for, I think, Jones, who I believe had an injury designation at some point this week, but I could be wrong. He's actually their sack leader this year. He's got 5. I think Grenard has 4. I would call this 2 under, 4 deep. So 2 under, 4 deep. And then these guys can lock up or bracket receivers. In this case, you get a nice clean route delineation for these guys to cover. Gilmore at the bottom is going to basically break on 13 and man. Certainly looks like man up to the top here, but I would say it's more of a quarters coverage from the Vikings. I didn't see it as much on 3rd and 5. I felt like I saw it more on 2nd and long. I don't know how much you guys get into trying to predict coverages. I do it. I'm wrong, probably way more than I'm right. A brilliant play by Aaron Rodgers here to defeat. Again, I think you've essentially got a Tampa 2 eight-man drop. You can see there's only 3 rushers. I've been a little surprised at how well Jihad Ward has looked on film. Not a guy known as a pass rusher. They're using him on the inside as an interior rusher often. I'll get back to the All-22 and try to explain to you what I suspect this is post-snap. I think it's very similar to the same coverage I described earlier where Van Ginkel was the underneath dropper in a Tampa 2 that basically was a drop 8. I think this is now your Mike linebacker that would be dropping. Of course, he's not on a Mike linebacker positionally. Since the ball is originating from the 14-yard line, I'm going to call this a Tampa 2, where these 2 guys are your half-field defenders. This is a player that normally would be lined up here and then getting depth, but there's no reason to do that because it is a 3rd and 10 from the 14. So the basic point here is, and if I got caught up in the details, forgive me, you're going to see a lot of crazy coverages, a lot of coverages that look crazy post-snap if you don't stop the run. You will see, if you don't run the football well. If you cannot run the football, you're going to see a shit ton of these, and it's going to be a nightmare to try to deal with. Well, for the offense and for you or myself or any of us trying to figure out what the heck the Vikings are doing post-snap. Now, look, what they do on defense is about deception. This is about aggression. And what I mean is the more aggressive that the Lions can be on first down, whether it's running the football effectively or throwing the ball and getting the Vikings defense on their heels, the less deception they're going to have to deal with later on in that series of downs or that possession. The reality is, in 2 games last year, Detroit was only able to produce, I think, 106 rushing yards against the Vikings, I should say. I think in one of those games, the offensive line had significant trouble. I can't exactly remember which one it was. They played 2 games in the span of 3 weeks. Correct me if I'm wrong there. At minimum, at worst, what you want as a Lions fan is a bunch of these situations. This is a 3rd and 4 where you got 11 personnel on the field. Typical alignment for your tight end into the boundary. St. Brown happens to be down here as well, which is always a great pairing if you ask me. Laporta and St. Brown on the same side, but I digress. 3rd and 4 where you retain the option or the ability to run the football if you want to. 3rd and 4 is drastically different than 3rd and 7. I would even say that 3rd and 3 is what you would like to shoot for. Does that mean that you need to get a run play out of the first 2? It's entirely possible. Every run play doesn't have to be a straight flow run play, meaning whichever side the running back flows to initially post-snap is where the ball is going to go. This actually happens to be a cutback against Arizona, playing a really poor version of a 5-1, in my opinion, where they're basically allowing cutbacks to kill them the entire first possession. I think actually first 2. A couple of examples of it here. I think the reverse and jet sweep game could be huge for Detroit this week. The reverses and some of the complementary plays off of it have been averaging over 10 yards per carry last week. Well, their last game, I should say, they were able to get a touchdown on a flea flicker reverse pass, whatever you want to call it, to Sam Laporta, 52 yards against the Cowboys. I think the reverse dynamic could really open things up for the run game at times. This is an example, a small example of it. Jet with an action off of it that would basically hold a backside defender. In this case, you have post-snap St. Brown running out into the flats like it's going to be like a hide concept. And then Jameson Williams, the guy who went in motion, peeling back in this direction as well. Just trying to hold an edge defender or maybe a second-level defender. And in this case, that's exactly where Montgomery ends up cutting it back. Anything that Ben Johnson can create or craft that might hold an edge defender and or an inside linebacker, I think is helpful. Sometimes those reverses may only be used once or twice a game. That's generally what we've been seeing so far. They have been incredibly effective for Detroit. If you're a Vikings fan and you've watched this long, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you really may not understand how impactful these reverses have been. Detroit had some trouble running the football in week 1 against the Rams up to overtime. This reverse to Khalif Raymond seemed to open the floodgates. David Montgomery took over after this play. If you're a Lions fan and you remember it differently, feel free to let me know in the comments section. The way that I remember it is that they had been able to run the ball inconsistently, and then after this play, David Montgomery and the offensive line really turned it on. Jameson Williams also getting the football in these reverses. I think it should be of primary importance to try to create some hesitation in the Vikings defensive players' minds, number one, and also in Brian Flores. Try to get him out of attack mode. He even kind of alluded to it or admitted it this week. I think he said something like, I believe in fighting fire with fire. Number one, I agree with him. Number two, I think there's got to be a way to, part of what Ben Johnson needs to try to do is put him on his heels, allow him to attack less. Is it possible? Well, like I said, the Vikings have forced 13 turnovers. Is that going to continue? I'm not sure. To be honest with you, I'm not sure that it is sustainable. It's pretty unbelievable when you watch the film how the ball is sticking to guys' hands. Like I said, I think 11 interceptions so far. Maybe it's 10. Additional to that, Detroit only has 4 turnovers this year. And if you compare it to Minnesota's offense, and this is the point in the video where I will try to reveal a statistic to you that I added up myself. I didn't go find this anywhere. So if I'm wrong, I'm willing to admit I'm wrong. Minnesota has committed 9 turnovers this year in 5 games. Last year, 2023, in 17 games, they committed 34. Now you may say, well, Coach, they were dealing with a difficult quarterback situation last year. Fine. They did commit 23 turnovers in 2022, and they went 13-4. In those 2 seasons, 2022 and 2023, only 6 games total with no turnovers. We're going to do this again. We're going to do this in a different way. 39 regular season games with their current head coach. The Vikings have committed 66 turnovers, if I did my math right. And that's only 6 of those 39 games without a turnover. That seems significant to me. I'm just going off of my instinct here. I don't know what other NFL teams' turnover rate is during that time. Perhaps you may say, Coach, I think it's skewed a little bit by the 2023 data having so many turnovers, essentially 2 per game at 34. You're almost at 2 per game this year. Sam Darnold is the quarterback. Last year, multiple guys played quarterback. The year before that, they had 1 quarterback. 3 or 4 different quarterbacks involved with this system have all experienced a high number of turnovers. That, to me, looks like a pattern. You may tell me if you disagree, and I have no problem with that. My premise is this. I think that generally the Vikings are going to turn the football over at least once on offense in the last 2 plus seasons, I should say. If you're the Lions, and this is me going off of my instinct and observations, watching Detroit's offense for 2 plus years, when they don't turn the football over, they win. If you can be +1 turnover margin, meaning Detroit doesn't suffer a turnover and the Vikings turn it over, which they seem to be apt to do, and Ben Johnson's offense can generate 120 to 125 on the ground at minimum, I think the Lions have a great chance to get a win here and generate more offense than people are expecting against a Vikings defense. Minnesota does allow 260 or 260 plus passing per game so far this year. Goff threw for 373 and 359 last year in 2 games. Along with that, as I mentioned earlier, Detroit only totaled 106 rushing yards in those 2 regular season games last year against Brian Flores' defense. That's why, for me, my baseline number that I think is required to be efficient offensively is 120 to 125. Probably could get the job done with 85 to 90 on the ground overall. But I do think that Montgomery is at a different level right now for whatever reason. I don't know how to describe that. And Jahmyr Gibbs is a threat in the run game and the pass game. I'm kind of amalgamating his impact as a pass receiver along with running the football I think Jahmyr Gibbs a potential real matchup problem for this Vikings defense in the pass game. It's going to be one heck of a fight. I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be able to watch the game live and then do a reaction video to it. My baseline for this one, if the Lions are +1 turnover margin with 0 turnovers, and the reason why I put that caveat in there is if you turn the football over once and the Vikings turn it over twice, if yours is a pick six or a fumble that's returned for a touchdown, that something that Minnesota's shown the capability to do so far this year, then that obviously changes the dynamic or the formula in terms of the total points that you need. I think Detroit and Ben Johnson are going to come in here with a good plan. The aggression, the downhill nature of this Vikings defense, the edge has got to be taken off of that somehow. Whether it's direct run flow plays, I'm not sure that you get that done consistently. There's some really good players in there on the inside for the Vikings defense. I think Blake Cashman's their best inside linebacker. I understand that there may be some pushback on that from Vikings fans who may or may not have listened this long anyway. He's out. I really like 99 and 97. I think 97 dealt with an injury this week, but 99 is nasty and very physical there on the inside. Grenard, Jones, Van Ginkel, who's extremely versatile. If you let Brian Flores get into his game, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, even 2nd and 8, then it kind of opens up a wider net of coverage possibilities for him to throw at Goff and could, theoretically, cause Goff a little bit of pause or hesitation getting the ball out such that the pass rush can get there and more negative yardage plays can be produced. It's a delicate balance in this game, if you ask me. I have increasingly become one of those people that says you should throw the ball on 1st down at times against these teams that are great against the run. And Minnesota is. Like I said, allowing 67 rushing yards per game. The Lions are averaging 157. That dynamic there is factor number 1 for me, along with turnovers, independent of how Detroit's defense performs. Missing Aiden Hutchinson, Carlton Davis III being on the injury report this week, looks like he will play. Obviously, that's a big factor as well. I appreciate you guys' time, man. If you enjoyed this film study preview or commentary / film study preview, I should say. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comment section, number 1. Number 2, if you think Lions fans would appreciate listening to my preview and my thoughts on the matter this late, I wish I'd gotten this out on Saturday morning, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach. Like I said, I'll be able to watch the game live and do a reaction video that'll come out later on Sunday afternoon. Appreciate you guys' time.